This video is brought to you in partnership with Stake. If you're in Australia, transfer at least $1,000 worth of Aussie shares across to the Stake platform and get 12 months of zero brokerage. Stake rewards, terms and conditions apply.
Doge is now everywhere in the federal government, and they are spreading like bed bugs.
The people voted for major government reform.
Doge is supposed to be in charge here, and the errors they're making seems like they didn't look at these things at all or think about them.
What Musk is doing is illegal and unconstitutional.
They wouldn't be complaining so much if we weren't doing something useful.
The Department of Government Efficiency has been a hot topic of discussion in the media over the past month, with some hailing it as a much-needed solution to reduce government wastage, and others calling it a huge waste of time. So in this video, I want to answer the question, is Doge actually doing anything? As we know, the Department of Government Efficiency was officially established on January 20, 2025 after President Trump issued the executive order creating it, and after Vivek Ramaswamy announced he would be stepping down from the project. This gave Elon Musk the reins.
I will create a Government Efficiency Commission tasked with conducting a complete financial and performance audit of the entire federal government. And Elon, because he's not very busy, has agreed to head that task force.
And the idea of the department is quite simply to check over the government spending to try and eliminate unnecessary wastage, and in doing so, over time reduce America's steep budget deficit, the difference between their expenses and income, to improve the financial position of the US government.
Like basically, we're on a path to bankruptcy. America's on a path to bankruptcy. So we have to cut government spending or we're just going to go bankrupt, just like a person would.
And I think most people generally like that goal. At the top of the department's website, it says the people voted for major reform, and they did. People want to reduce wasteful spending, and that means, as Elon Musk has put it so eloquently previously, breaking through a large amount of bureaucracy.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy. Chainsaw!
There's no doubt Musk is extremely fired up about his new advisory role, and he's promised a transparent, trustworthy system so that everyone can see exactly how effective the department has been.
Transparency is what builds trust, not simply somebody asserting trust. So not somebody saying they're trustworthy, but transparency, so you can see everything that's going on. All of our actions are maximally transparent. In fact, I don't know of a case where an organization has been more transparent than the Doge organization.
This has led to the implementation of a wall of receipts on the department's website, posting what contracts have been cancelled, what the savings have been, alongside a short description and links to the contract itself on the government's official database. Now, I love this idea. It seems ultra transparent, but unfortunately, if you dig a little bit deeper, cracks start to emerge, as a recent New York Times investigation found. Take this for example. This is a record for an $8 billion government contract awarded to D&G Support Services back in 2022 for technical support services for the Office of Diversity and Civil Rights. The only problem is that this contract is wrong. It's supposed to be an $8 million contract. It only ever was an $8 million contract. And this contract was eventually corrected in the database on January 22nd this year. So why do I bring this up? Well, this contract was one of the initiatives eventually cancelled by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, but it didn't stop the department from claiming an $8 billion cost saving to the American people, something that is objectively incorrect.
You know, we will make mistakes. Nobody's going to bat 1,000.
I mean, if you can find that out, is it a simple mistake on their part, or is it deceptive?
Now, mistakes are of course understandable, but what happened next was a little bit strange. The Doge website initially included a screenshot from the federal contracting database showing that the contract's value was $8 million, even as the Doge site listed $8 billion in savings. But on Tuesday night, around the same time as this New York Times article was published, Doge removed the screenshot that showed the mismatch, but continued to claim $8 billion in savings. Then it added a link to the original incorrect version of the listing showing an $8 billion value. Now, Doge did get called out for this, and it was eventually corrected, but it still gets weirder because when the $7.992 billion change was made, the total savings number at the top of the department's website didn't change. The total savings number at the time stayed at $55 billion. And while that is not necessarily evidence that the department is actively trying to mislead the American people, it definitely raises the question, can we trust these numbers? Because unfortunately, these aren't the only questionable mistakes the department has made so far, with the New York Times also finding Doge's wall of receipts being mistakenly filled with double or triple counted contracts, incorrect figures, and inflated totals. And this makes it impossible to understand the true cost savings found by Doge, which is honestly what I'm really interested in understanding. The sad reality is that it likely means that the quoted $105 billion in cost savings they've been able to generate thus far is likely much, much lower. Another issue found was that in some instances, Doge has been caught taking credit for ending contracts that had already expired or ended under a previous administration. In some instances, contractors said they themselves chose not to renew, but Doge has still retroactively claimed those savings. For example, David Reed, an environmental scientist in Michigan, found his own contract studying invasive species included in the Doge savings list, which is pretty odd considering that contract expired on the 31st of December last year, at which time he retired and chose not to renew it. He said to the New York Times, that contract wasn't cancelled by Doge or anyone else. If they took credit for cancelling that contract, they're lying. And another highlighted issue to consider with the Doge savings is that it fails to include the inescapable and sometimes rather large costs that come with restructuring or shutting things down. For example, a public company like Meta will usually see its costs initially rise when they reduce headcount before savings are seen. In Q1 of 2023, they reduced their headcount by roughly 11,000 employees, but in their quarterly earnings release, they noted that this cost-saving initiative actually cost them an additional $1.14 billion before the costs started to shrink. It's no different in the case of cancelling government contracts. You will undoubtedly come up against added expenses such as early termination fees, costs related to winding down staff and offices, and let's not forget, potential litigation.
The cuts have raised legal questions and already sparked a series of lawsuits.
And then finally, another issue the New York Times found is that Doge often equates a contract's entire potential value, or what's left of it, with their cost savings, even if only part of the work was cancelled or if the government was unlikely to spend the entire ceiling amount in the first place. If they set a ceiling for $10 million for a project, that's what Doge claims, but cancelling it doesn't necessarily free up that money, and in many cases that sum is simply a placeholder. It isn't actually spent, meaning the savings are actually much less than reported. So the sad reality is that on the whole, the cost savings from Doge are probably much lower than what gets reported on the official website. But interestingly, when we go back to the question, is Doge really doing anything? What we've spoken about so far doesn't even get close to the main problem. And this is where we really get to the crux of the argument. So back when the concept of Doge was first being tossed around, Elon stated that he plans to cut out $2 trillion from the US budget by the 4th of July, 2026.
How much do you think we can rip out of this Harris-Biden budget?
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
Yeah!
Why did he say this? Well, because $2 trillion is the rough difference between annual US government spending and annual US government income. So if Elon were to find $2 trillion of wastage that could be cut from the government, then his department would have balanced the books. America's financial situation would be greatly improved as the deficit would be eliminated and you'd be back to break even. But here's the thing, to get Doge on track to hit its goal, Elon and his team needs to find $26 billion of government wastage per week. That's like shutting down the equivalent of the US Department of Agriculture every single week. That's an incredibly tall order. And from an ego perspective, it makes sense that Elon might look to overestimate the savings number to make it seem as though his department is achieving more than it is. I know that sounds crazy, but if he paid someone to level up his account in a video game to make himself look better than he actually is, it's not a stretch to believe that that's part of the equation here. But I digress. Let's stay focused on that $2 trillion number for a moment, because this is the important part of the story to understand. This is $2 trillion visualized by a bar. This bar needs to be filled up for Doge to have balanced the books of the American government. Now, you remember how much of a fuss was made about the $50 million in condoms to Gaza story? Now, of course, that was later disproven as the $50 million was not sent to Hamas. Rather, it was being sent to Gaza province, Mozambique, where US aid funds were allocated for HIV prevention. But the point is this, that story was made such a big deal by Elon and Trump. It ripped through the media, and the Department of Government Efficiency was so proud to point out the cancellation of this contract. But this is how much it fills up the $2 trillion bar, 0.0025%. In other words, the Department of Government Efficiency needs to cancel another 39,999 contracts just like that one to hit their $2 trillion savings goal. Okay, I know what you're thinking. A lot of government contracts and spending is worth a hell of a lot more than 50 million. True. And as we speak, the Department of Government Efficiency has reportedly found over $105 billion worth of cost savings. If true, that's still pretty impressive, even if it puts them behind schedule. So let's not focus on the $50 million contracts. Let's start to cut some much bigger expenditures, maybe even whole departments. So this is the budget of the United States of America for fiscal year 2025. Now, overall, in 2024, the government spent $6.75 trillion, and in that, the biggest spending categories were Social Security and healthcare. They are termed mandatory spending by the government, and the Trump administration has been pretty clear that Doge won't be touching these areas. So let's leave them for now, but start cutting in other areas. The Department of Education, for example, that's one department Trump has actually said he'd like to get rid of.
I'm going to close the Department of Education and move education back to the states.
So let's do something crazy and cut the whole thing. Just shut it down. Well, in 2024, discretionary funding for the Department of Education was $80 billion, which fills the $2 trillion bar by this amount, 3.96%, not a whole lot. Okay, we need to be more ruthless. NASA, gone. Department of Commerce, gone. EPA, gone. Department of Labor, gone. Department of Transportation, gone. I would not be very popular at this point, but how are we doing on filling up our $2 trillion line? Well, we've actually only progressed another 4.45% towards our savings target. You see where this is going, right? In fact, if we shut down the government entirely, including cutting out the $817 billion defense budget, we'd still fall $250 billion short of Elon's proposed cost savings. So you might be asking, how does shutting down the government only cut 1.75 trillion out of the 6.75 trillion of government spending? Well, it is because most of the government spending is in the form of Social Security and healthcare payments, and unfortunately, interest payments on government debt. And all that stuff can't really be cut out. However, with that said, one of Elon's main assertions is he believes there is quite a lot of fraud in the Social Security and healthcare system, and the Government Accountability Office even states that the federal government could be losing $233 billion to over $500 billion annually to fraud alone. So granted, if Musk was able to cut out all fraud in Social Security and healthcare payments and completely shut down the government, he would hit his proposed $2 trillion in Doge savings. But of course, realistically, that ain't gonna happen. So with the $2 trillion savings goal very much an uphill battle, is the Department of Government Efficiency worth it? Well, this is a tough one, and I don't think the answer is straightforward, because reasonable arguments can be made on both sides. On one hand, skeptics argue that reaching the $2 trillion target is unrealistic, that discrepancies in reported savings on the department's website raise concerns, and that potential conflicts of interest could undermine Doge's whole credibility. However, the initiative itself reflects a broader attempt to address America's growing fiscal challenges. The federal deficit continues to expand, and with higher interest rates driving up the cost of borrowing, efforts to improve government efficiency and reduce wasteful spending, they have clear merit. But there is another layer to this debate, which is more related to the execution of these cost-saving efforts. We know Elon Musk's rapid decision-making style, successful in the private sector through companies like Tesla and SpaceX, prioritizes swift action, iteration, and learning fast from mistakes. And while this approach has driven fast innovation in technology, applying it to government operations, regulatory agencies, and essential services presents much different risks. The condoms to Gaza mishap is a classic example, but he's also accidentally cut out money for Ebola prevention. Now, luckily that mistake was caught quickly, but what happens if next time it isn't? And this really has been the major criticism of Elon's work so far. Elon, with his companies Tesla and SpaceX, has a fail fast culture. Just do things, test the limit, fail fast, learn from it. And this is great when you're trying to build a brand new rocket. But when you're messing around with large government departments and agencies, many of which A, employ thousands of people, and B, are in place specifically to stop bad things from happening, and you just wonder if a slightly more delicate approach is warranted. But with that said, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Are you all for the Doge, or are you against Elon's plan to cut out the bureaucracy? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks very much for watching. Leave a like on the video if you did enjoy it. And with that said, I'll see you guys in the next video.